morning, everybody. Ladies. Any extras? Everybody good?
That's okay. I gotta see it,
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm a patriotic kind of guy. I've always been a God, family, kind of country thing. I'm wearing my dad's special tie clasp I wear on special occasions, parades and others when he was a medical corpsman in Korea. The parades, I remember growing up on 4th of July watching my Uncle Dave, who was a two-tour guy in World War II, always marching down the Seneca Street in Tinicum in the parade. I kind of grew up with those memories where my family and parents always took us to every parade and every fireworks thing throughout the area. Just never been a part of that. I missed Vietnam by 1 year. I was number 8 in the draft the last year when they did the lottery, and I thought, oh my goodness, all the things they had on the news and how much was televised, I wasn't sure what was happening on there. So I've always had an interest in where my dad was, and even in the last few months of my mom's life, she began sharing more stories that my dad was on the 38th parallel in Korea. Part of his job was to go into the northern part of Korea and get the wounded soldiers out and bring them back. And I wondered why my dad never laughed, why he was such a serious guy, where he took life and never talked about the war, didn't even want to watch war movies. I can't imagine how some of those things would affect you. But we're going to talk a little bit about Independence Day and the Revolutionary War, and hopefully it will affect you. In fact, you see a lighthouse with the light, and it goes back to April 18th. It was fairly, from the reports, a fairly cool evening. About 10 o'clock, dark. Paul was behind a bush, staring across the lake, just waiting and waiting and waiting to see a light. Not in a lighthouse, as in the picture, but really in a church tower. That if you looked at the pictures online and see the distance of it, you could barely make out in the shadows of the buildings, the church tower. Although it's pretty high, it would be really hard to see a light. And especially if you were staring and waiting and waiting and waiting for that light that you knew was coming. You knew it was coming because a young boy had overheard the soldiers that afternoon and the dock as they were getting their muskets ready and getting the supplies for an attack, that after years of talk and uprisings and trials and floggings and all the stuff that went on that led these colonists to an insurrection, that this was the night that the British had had enough, and they were going to take a stand, and they were going to march. And it wasn't a matter of if, but when and where. And they came up with that code that 1, if by land, 2, if by sea. It wasn't will they come, it's which way are they coming? And how do we get ready? And just kind of picturing yourself that night sitting there waiting, and all of a sudden, is it 1, is it 2, is it 1? Oh my goodness, it's dark and there's clouds. And no, it's definitely 2, and they're coming. They're coming. Hundreds and hundreds of British soldiers are now going to march on a series of towns with orders to take no prisoners, to burn down buildings, to get all those insurrectionists and really just destroy them. Now, your job is to go out and give that message. What do you say? When people in the farming community would be in bed long ago, and you're going to ride from town to town, and Paul was one of several riders that, listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere, that 11-mile loop that he went from different towns, screaming a simple message. What was the message? The British are coming. Now is the time. The British are coming. The British are coming. Take up your arms, and knocking on a few doors, yelling as fast as they could and going around. And basically, you had a response. If someone walked in that door right now and said, they're 6 blocks away, the enemy is coming, get ready. What would you do? You got to get the wife, you got to get the kids. Where do you keep your weapons? What do you hide if they're going to come and take all your food, if they're going to take over your house? I mean, you've got to prepare. This is war. There's war, and you had moments to prepare. It was a simple message that called for an immediate response that led to a rather intense battle, and people lost their lives that night. Buildings were burnt down, but a message was given that brought some hope and allowed some preparation to make the war better. That's kind of where we're going to go spiritually, but in the midst of researching some of the stuff that was on there and the different people that were there, the next one, we actually were two behind here, but my clicker, I left part of my clicker at my last church. Can you all see? I'm sorry. Okay, yeah, just thinking of that. Someone posted on Facebook a couple days ago about the young girl who was part of the messengers. Have you heard about this girl? Sybil Lubinuk, the 14-year-old daughter. How old are you, Jennifer? 13. You're right, 14 years old, 4'10", according to the report. This little girl rode 40 miles. 4 times more than Paul Revere. And she's carrying, you can see in the statue, and in her honor, a stick. She was actually attacked by soldiers twice, had to make her way through swamps, and went to several different towns in an effort to get to her dad, where one of the major attacks was going to go. And there's no record in history. The story came through a diary of her son and grandson, whom she had told the story of, and it was collaborated by several other soldiers and writings. But, according to Wikipedia, there's no actual evidence that the girl made the ride, but the story survived, and there's a statue. But the whole thing is, young and old, there was a call, and she went out, and because of her message, lives were saved. Because of her message, people were spared and were able to get ready for the battles. I think of that this morning whenever I speak and guest speak at a church. If just one message, can one message make a difference? One little word, could it bring hope? Could it bring relief? Could it bring forgiveness? Could it bring healing? And everywhere I go, people need those things. One of my favorite songs from last night with Fourth Man Furnace, but the whole concert was excellent. But I put it on Facebook this morning. I need thee. What was that song? I need thee. Oh, I need thee. Oh my goodness. I'm thinking of the hymn. How does it go? What's the song?
One thing remains.
We need them. We need them. I think of my.
So stop giving it away.
Yes. Okay, good. Okay, well, there's a really good song. I think of the old hymn, I Need Thee Every Hour. That was my grandmother's song as she lay in the hospital the last, she would sing that over and over, and she sang worse than I do. It was terrible. They put her in a room down the hall by herself because other people were getting upset. But here we go. So here's our message. And just to try to picture the panic, what was going on. That night from Boston, 700 soldiers marched towards there. 700, that's, people say with the gun things, and you see all this stuff about every time there's a shooting about guns and take your guns and do stuff. I don't care if you got a shotgun, a hunting, but if 700 soldiers came marching down Cedar Street, you're in trouble. It's a whole different world than I've got my pistol, or I got my bow and arrow, or I got my stuff. What am I going to do? I mean, that idea of an organized militia being able to defend themselves is a whole different world. It's a whole different world. But I mean, that just gives you an idea of it. Let's look at it. But there is the Declaration. Have you ever read the Declaration of Independence? Anybody ever read the thing? I've reread it several times in preparation for last week and this week. So when in the course of human events, these things happen. That's basically as life happens, things happen. And there comes a time, it says in that first paragraph, where sometimes you got to cut off those relationships. And as I read through even this morning, Jefferson disagreed with 2 of the clauses that were put into his draft. He sent out copies of his original draft because he didn't like the fact that they messed up with his prose. That somehow they injected into this rational what was he called? A rational enlightenment, or whatever he was called. That the fact that they referred to a sovereign God in the beginning and ended with a prayer at the end, he objected to those being included. But the rest of them wanted that put in there, that nothing happens in this universe outside the knowledge of a sovereign God. And at the end, if we're going to make this thing work, this declaration forming a new union, right, and if we're going to actually try to help people find those rights in the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we're going to need some help. And who better than to beseech the sovereign creator of all things? So we have this incredible document, and in the midst of it is a list of like 38 charges against the King of England. And he was doing some nasty stuff. People were taken away to England for trial with no witnesses. People's property were absconded, in addition to all the taxes upon taxes upon taxes and other acts of cruelty that are documented. I mean, if you read the charges here, it's like the Holocaust. There are things that were done that were just the brutality that was, and the threats that were being taken, and people were losing their homes. They were losing their farms. They were losing their lives. It took a lot to bring this people to a point where they said, no more. We are going to make a declaration of independence. And we know that this could cost our lives. They pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. They were pledging everything. Everything. And last week when I shared part of this message, we had communion. And you know, in my old church where I grew up, there's stained glass windows with in memory of. And I did some research on the Stony Bank Church, which is connected to the Brandywine Campground. Two brothers of Quaker tradition, Elwood and Israel Pyle, went to Chester Heights camp meeting. And these Quakers, whose services were quiet and solemn and waiting for the Spirit of God to move, where someone would dare speak up, all of a sudden they got the Holy Spirit. They got renewed, they got revived, they got whatever phrase you want to use for it, but they got kicked out of the Quaker fellowship. The charge against them, actually kicked out is the wrong term. If you look it up, they were actually uninvited. They were uninvited to the Quaker fellowship, and the charge against them was excessive enthusiasm for the Lord. Would we be kicked out? Anybody here excessively enthusiastic for the Lord? And what does that look like? And they needed a place to fellowship, being people of means. They built the Stony Bank Community Church. About 10, 15 years later, Elwood thought it was too far to drive that 5 miles on a horse and buggy up from Thornbury all the way to Stony Bank Road, so he built his own church called the Bethlehem United Methodist Church. But their roots are in the camp meeting movement. So interesting declarations that are there. So where are we? Just to think about that history, how does that relate spiritually? Anyone familiar with this book, The Light and the Glory? The Light and the Glory, Peter Marshall? Oh my goodness, I've read this like 6 times. I'm going to read it again this summer. It starts with the travels of Columbus, and it goes all the way through. There's a sequel called From Sea to Shining Sea. But it's excerpts of biographies and diaries of guys like William Bradford, Christopher Columbus, George Washington, Samuel Adams, and it weaves into an actual story form with actual excerpts. What went on in the forming of discovering of America, the whole Mayflower and all the adventures of there, and the loss that took place that first year of those first colonists to the many, many battles from the different diaries, where if you don't see God's hand on the forming of this country, to those Columbus actually even making it across the ocean when they were just about to kill him on the ships, to the Mayflower making it through after 3 different trips were canceled, and the speedwell gets a leak, and then the main beam breaks in a storm, and they got to use a printing press to get it up. And that first winter, where I think 56 of 103 people died, and oh my goodness, it was incredibly hard to form this colony. To the hand upon George Washington himself, individuals, people groups, and the nation, God has had his hand. There was a great story, page 286. I don't like to read stuff too much when I'm speaking, but after one of the French Indian Wars, 15 years later, this feeble, vulnerable old chieftain, it says in the writings, came to seek out the great white leader that defeated him in battle. And when he finally got and arranged a sitting council with George Washington, who at the time was an officer, he said, you're the guy. He said, you were coming down the path, and we had our best marksmen on both sides of the path. These guys could shoot a fly off a twig at 20 yards. They don't miss. And you, being 6'4", were such an easy target. I told all my marksmen, go for the guy in the front. If we get him, we'll win this battle. And all my marksmen swore that they hit you. 2 horses were shot out under him. When Washington got to his tent that night, his vest was filled with bullet holes, but not one penetrated. And the Indian said, we knew at this point God's hand was on you, and we were destined to defeat, and that you were going to be the leader of this new land. And that is accounted in several other places in history, not just the story of an old Indian chief. But is just one area. Can we trust God with our lives? Can we trust Him with our nation when cities are in an uproar? There's others, so many things. I put on the outline there, God, the perfect weatherman. Battle after battle after battle, like in Scripture. Storms came up, clouds came over, snow came down, fog came up. Different things happened when every single time Washington and his little band of rebels who were undersupplied. I read one this morning where they were down to 9 bullets each. There's no way they were going to withstand it. They were down to 9 bullets each. And they couldn't get Congress and people to support them. And he's trying to fight and do whatever he can. He was brilliant at individual battles, the strategies that were there. But God would bring up a fog. He would send in a storm. And again and again and again, the people were delivered to turn around this battle. Reading of Valley Forge and what they endured and the clothes they were wearing and the diet they were eating. It is just incredible for our country. So that's a little bit about our country. But we're talking this morning what's on our currency, what some people still want to get off of our currency. 4 little words. In God we trust. Why is that so offensive to so many people? In God we trust. And it is a great slogan, but we sure don't do it. I mean, not even in the church, without getting into the political end. Who are we really trusting in? What's going to happen? Who can turn our country around? Who can turn our life around? Who can turn anything around? And what do we have to trust God for? For most of us, we got food in the refrigerator. We got a little bit of money in the bank. We got a little bit of this. We got friends there. We don't have to trust God for something. I'm thinking we battle for independence in our country. Now, growing up, can't wait to get out of my house, can't wait to get on my own, I can't wait to be financially independent, can't wait for this, can't wait for, so I don't have to need anybody. And the older you get, the more you find, boy, we need people all the time. We need each other, and we certainly need the Lord. So this battle for independence, my title this morning is actually a declaration of dependence. We are totally dependent on God for everything. Our next breath, to get through the night, to get some sleep, right, Nate? Well, we depend on God for everything. So in God we trust. So what is trust? What is faith? Do you remember the object lesson we did way back when this was still paneling and seats were there, walls were up? I brought in a 2x6, about a 10-foot 2x6, and Pastor Chuck came up here, and we had it standing out like a diving board. Do you remember doing that? I had Chuck stand on it, and I said, no, I need to trust 2 things. Because the literal definition of the word trust is to put one's weight upon, your full weight. Not just a little bit, but to completely trust means I'm all in. So Chuck stood up here on this board. I was going to bring it today, and I just couldn't fit it in the car. And I just began to walk. Now I got to trust him. Is he going to be funny and step off? And is this board going to hold all whopping 165 pounds of me? But I kept coming out, and it is an illustration of the word trust, to put one's full weight. The definition in Unger's Bible Dictionary of faith is not just intellectual agreement with some truth, or assent, they use the word assent, but the submission of one's life to that truth. Not just agreeing, well, yeah, that's true, I believe that fact, but I believe that fact enough where I'm going to submit my life to whatever that truth is. That's faith. Faith to get us to heaven, faith to get us through the day. What are we trusting God for? So it's important to God. This is from our trip last year where we had the zip line across the mountain. You really can't grasp that it's hundreds of feet down and we're going across the mountain. You can't maybe see the cables going all the way across. Different there. What made this, and they made me go first. My kids made me go first. But the second one, the next picture, as we were getting to the 3rd stage, a cloud moved in. And now you were going to jump off a telephone pole that's over a mountain, going at 45 miles an hour. And you basically had to step off into a cloud. And it was terrifying. I'm still shaking just reliving it. It's like, it was a 45-second scream if you listen to the video. It was terrifying. Blind faith, right? But there was a cable. And you test a little bit, but boy, to completely trust God is hard. So, and that is the goal, right? That's the goal for us, is to completely trust God for our salvation, that what He did in the cross is enough. Because people always want to believe plus, and as soon as you add just a little bit to what God did, it's no longer grace. but I'm going to keep this necklace just in case. I'll keep my statue on there. I'm going to, just in case, that Christianity thing's not right. People always want to hedge their bet. But it's either all win or all out. For that declaration, it was all win. It's either take up arms. You got to pick a side. So here we go. How does God teach faith? If it's so important, how did he teach a nation? How did he teach individuals? We're going to look at about 7, 8 real quick examples that are on your outline. I'm not going to page through all the scriptures. They're there for you. You can look back. But in Exodus 13:21, it talks about a nation of Israel going out of Egypt. A nation, what people estimate, between 2 and 4 million. Now immediately I go to online and I Google that, and I see skeptics and people. There's no way 70 people under Joseph and his family could turn into over 2 million people in 430 years. So of course they bring in all the experts and found out, actually, if you look at the birth rate and the mortality rate and all the stuff that goes in and take it out there, it's actually over 4 million people. So the biblical record, once again, when you actually look at the facts and sort it through, before TV, before stuff, people in tents, people in the desert, there's not a lot of things to do. They had a lot of kids, but they also had a lot of death. And there was, I forget the number now, right? So I just drew a blank on it. But boy, there's a lot of funerals every day. Because that whole generation, 18 and over, died before they could get into the promised land because they did not put their faith and trust in God, right? They saw the good land God promised. Oh, the land's good, but there's giants and we're but grasshoppers, right? Because of their lack of faith, they missed out on the blessing. But that whole generation had to pass away. That's a lot of funerals. Now, if you just do so many a day or they kind of died at once, I don't know, but it's still a lot of funerals. And you wonder why they murmured and complained, because when they got out there and they saw the miracle, and they saw the Red Sea, and they had the pillar of fire in front of them, and Scripture says that fire led them, right? The pillar of fire at night and a cloud by day. And then once they got to the Red Sea, it said the cloud, in the text, the cloud moved behind them and was a barrier between the Egyptian army and God's people. They saw that. Moses said, stand back and see the salvation of the Lord. You get across and spread out and watch this as the mighty Egyptian army is just left in the midst of the flood and the waters crashing down. It was an amazing thing that they got to witness the 10 plagues and go across it. In the 10 plagues, you say, well, Charlton Heston in the movie, it took about 30 minutes, but I don't know if it was one plague a month, was it one plague a year? The time frame is not clear in Scripture, but boy, you wouldn't forget any of that. That lightning yesterday was pretty intense and the worst storm you've ever been in, but frogs everywhere, darkness everywhere, boils everywhere. You think about those 10 plagues, I don't think I would forget any of them. And each time God did it, why? That they might know that He is God and there is none like Him. They might know that He is God and there is none like Him. So this is the road we took when I was on my trip to Israel back in 1989. And we were on that road for 6 hours, and that's the view. You wonder why the Jews murmured and complained. Have you brought us out here to die? We left all that food back in India. You brought us out here to die? Because how are you going to feed 2 to 3 million people? There's no rest stop in 30 minutes. There's no McDonald's around the corner. You've got your family, your kids, and what little livestock and all the money that they plundered from the Egyptians. They said, here, take my money and go. Get out of here. No more plagues. Go. It's interesting how God provided for them. But that's an incredible miracle that God said, you can trust me. You can trust me. I'm going to feed you. Great. Anybody been to Promise Keepers? You guys are Promise Keepers back in 95 when it was down at the vet. You don't know where. What I remember, because weird things here. We feed how many a week, a month? I love the stats, the updates.
400 some.
Okay, and we got a whole room full of food, right? It's a lot. When we had 60,000 men at Promise Keepers down at the vet. What I remember was we all left the vet to go over into the Spectrum parking lot, and there were about 60 tractor trailers. And all 60,000 men walked out, came by, and got a little styrofoam thing that had a hoagie, a chip, and a soda, a hoagie, a chip, and a soda, a hoagie, a chip. And they fed about 60,000 men in an hour, but it was a lot of tractor trailers for one small meal, one day. 2 million, 3 million people every day for 40 years? And that's the warehouse? And God said, don't worry, I'm going to take care of you. You know, I'm going to supply food. Now remember, they did have some cattle, they had some livestock, they had some money that maybe if they came across the village, they could buy some food for 2 million people. That's what the skeptics said. Oh, they just bought food. From who? That's the next slide. This is the one view when I was in Israel. Yeah, there's a guy. See if he has anything to eat. The skeptics are amazing how they doubt what God has done. But in the midst of this, I forget where I was going with that. But the manna. The manna is, what were the instructions in manna? They were to go out every morning and collect, what's the phrase? Anyone know the phrase? As much as they wanted, as much as they needed. Now, you know, I got a lot of kids. And if I'm out there collecting some manna, and I know I got teenage boys and they're going to be hungry in an hour after they eat this manna, I might collect a little bit more. And if you're like my mom, everywhere she went, every restaurant, everything, she always had a little Ziploc bag in her purse just to take a few things, just in case. Now, before they did doggy bags for everybody, my goodness, we still got enough sweet and low to last until the next Y2K. I mean, she had a thing for one. It's just, you got to put stuff in there. But God said, no, you take as much as you need. And what happened to the people? Because there were people just like my mom who took a little bit extra, tried to keep it for the next morning in case they needed a snack. What happened to it?
It was rotten.
It turned rotten. It spoiled. And God wanted to show them right there from day one, you can trust me. You can trust me. You can trust me. Now, I'm a little confused. The last 2 days I've been posting on Facebook, where is that line between trusting God and man's effort? Because it is interesting that when they finally crossed that Jordan River, the first thing that happened was that the manna dried up. God showed he could provide for 40 years, but he said, you know what? I'm taking you to houses you didn't build, to vineyards you didn't plant, to wells you didn't dig. And now, you know what? You got to do a little something. But don't forget, that plant's not going to grow without me. That well's not staying full without me. The lesson was there, but there's still effort on man's part. But our effort's never the thing that makes it happen. And that finding that line between trusting in God and just fatalism. Well, if it happens, it happens. If God, men are called to do stuff, but obedience and trust comes first. So there are some examples of that in the meat and the quail. There's some other stories. We got a hot. So there's another story of King Jehoshaphat, 2 Chronicles 20 and 1 Chronicles 20. We're going to look at two different stories. But this is when it says, Jehoshaphat says, a vast army has surrounded us. And I have preached on that prayer. It's just one of the best prayers in Scripture. Oh Lord, did you not promise us this land? Are you not the God who did this, this, and this? And at the end, will you not help us? I mean, did you not? Are you not? Will you not? It's a great 3-point sermon right there. It's a great prayer. But the heart of that prayer comes down to the end and says, Lord, we are helpless before our enemy. We're helpless. But our eyes are on you. Boy, that's a great prayer. Now, this is a little picture of D-Day. This is from one of those, what do you call the blimp things that were out there. I mean, do you know how many people were at D-Day? How many soldiers were involved with one battle and that invasion? The next one will tell us that. Just the initial number, can you read that on all you military guys? I mean, there were 11,590 planes. There were over 6,000 ships. If you remember that scene, I think it was Saving Private Ryan, where the German lookout was looking at the pillbox, and he's trying to reach the general to say, they're here, and he says, I see ships, and the German guy says, how many? And he says, all of them. And that view, I couldn't find a picture of the entire fleet, but that's the best picture, that last one that I saw. But the number of soldiers, 156,000. Go back to the picture, Dawn, just to get a feel for that. That's a lot of people for one beach. That's a lot of people in one battle. But in 2 Chronicles 20, it says there were 185,000 enemies against Israel. Now, we did a few weeks ago, Gideon, and the whittling down of the army from 30,000 to 12,000 to 10,000 to 300. And that was going against an army that it was 150,000 according to the one census in Scripture, but they had marauding bands, little troops that would go out and just steal all the food, just 15,000. But either way, if it's 300 against 15,000, it's still overwhelming. And who do you turn to? How big is that battle? Again, I don't want to get too caught up with the numbers of that, except it was huge. And when Jehoshaphat says we are helpless before our enemy, it's bigger than that. And they're well armed and well trained, and we are not. Lord, we're helpless before you. And how God outlines, as he did in Jericho, to organize prayer, to call the nation to fasting, to begin praising and worshiping, and then watching God bring confusion upon the enemy, where 185,000 lay dead. Wow. That's a God you can trust. So he leads us, he feeds us, he defends us. We can trust him for those things. Keep going, let's see what else we got. Now this is a fascinating story to me. Some of you kids don't remember. Actually, you old enough, do you remember Let's Make a Deal? Okay, door number 1, door number 2, door number 3. There was always one Zonker, right? Always had the donkey or something in there.
It's still on today. Wayne Brady is the host.
Oh, is it really? Okay. So here we are. David does something really stupid. And he gets warned, and he does it anyway. And then all of a sudden the prophet comes up and says, because of what you did, you get 3 choices. Now here's your choices. Door number 1, you can go and face famine for the next 3 years. 3 years for your whole nation. Because you did something wrong, the whole nation suffers. We forget sometimes, leadership and community, that we're part of a group. You know, individual American, but we are connected, and boy, what we do affects other people, right? But David gets a choice of 3 years of famine, or 3 months of war. Hey, 1 day of war, pretty bad. Or 3 days of pestilence under the hand of God. Oh man, what would you choose? I don't like those choices. Parents today go with our timeouts, and we could get into the whole parenting thing, but there were some tough choices there. And David says, I will take the 3 days under God's judgment because he's merciful. But because of his sin, 70,000 people died. Because of his sin, 70,000 died in those 3 days, and God said enough. What did he do that was so bad? In 1 Chronicles 20, what did he do? It says in 1 Chronicles 20, verse 1, Satan moved on David to number the people. He took a census. And 70,000 had to die because he counted the people. Why is that so hard? Our next picture, just kind of, don't forget where David was from. When David fought against Goliath, what did he say? The Lord delivered me from the lion, the Lord delivered me from the bear, and the Lord will take care of you, Goliath. He had nothing to depend on but the Lord. Now that he's established a kingdom, he starts to count people to think, oh, let me just see how strong I've gotten. And that line between trusting in yourself and trusting God is enough to keep you out of heaven. That trusting in yourself and trusting in God is enough to rob you of joy and peace. And God said, as a leader that's called to trust in me and model before that, the consequences are severe. And because he put his faith in himself, God brought this incredible judgment. Now, that seems awful severe. Now, if we were to take a little test today and say, anybody check your IRA? Is that right, the IRA? Is that what it's called, the IRA? Because we don't have one. But one of those Roth things or investment things or stock things, what do we check on to see if I'm doing all right? And I got to see if we have enough food. You want to know how panicky people are? Just announce in Philadelphia there's going to be a snowstorm tomorrow. And there won't be a gallon of milk or an egg within 60 miles of this place. What is it with people and milk and egg? I don't get the panic. But oh my goodness, so we all have scrambled eggs the next day as there's a dusting of snow outside, right? It's crazy. It's crazy. But we don't trust God enough. What would we do if we didn't have electric? What would we do if Wawa's were empty? People panic, right? So we need to trust God. Let's keep going. So how does God teach us this? How does God teach us to trust? We go through, these things are written, it tells us in Corinthians, as examples, so we can learn that God will meet our needs. He will take care of our food. He can protect us from any enemy. He will lead us wherever we need to go. You look at these stories and God saying, you can trust me, you can trust me, you can trust me, you can trust me. And now we begin a whole New Testament, a new era in history, and Jesus has to teach this lesson to his followers. So what does he do in Mark chapter 6 after he gathers his disciples together and he begins teaching from community to community? He says, go out and don't take what? Anything. Don't take a purse, don't take a staff, don't take a sword. No sword? My dad used to keep a piece of sharpened metal under the seat in his car. because he had to drive through Chester to go to work at Sun Oil. And I said, God, what is this thing for? Hey, you stop at a red light, you look around, because guys jump cars when they stop at red lights. Well, he would stop, and he was always like on high alert. And he'd always have his hand under there, because he wanted to be ready, right? He had to be ready. You travel these roads in Jerusalem in those days, you had to have a weapon. There were a lot of people, a lot of gangs, a lot of people that would do you harm. But Jesus said, you go out. And my mom's here. Here's your little money. Slip that in your pocket for this trip. Here's a little something on the way home. Just you better take an extra 25. Remember, put some money in your toilet kit just in case you lose your wallet, you lose this, and you lose your credit card. We always want to have a backup. And Jesus said, go out. Just go out. Don't take anything. And if you read the follow-up to Luke chapter 10, when they came back rejoicing. Because they saw the power of God. Even the demons were subject to him and their needs were met and others. Now again, later as their trust was built, then Jesus said, now you can take some stuff, but don't forget, you got to trust in me first. There's a progress, there's a procession in there. I love the picture of this. Your girlfriend said she's only bringing her essentials for the trip. Hey, having girls and going on vacation. Here's the boys, right? Got a change of underwear and a bathing suit. We're good. And the girls go, oh my goodness, is that too much of a stereotype? Is that too much of a stereotype? We got girls and things. So how did Jesus teach? He put us in places where we could see that he could still do it. What's our next one? Matthew 6, his most famous sermon, and one of his is the Sermon on the Mount, right? I was going to try to play the trailer to Lilies of the Field with Sidney Poitier. Thought it would be appropriate because there's that great scene where this black man is teaching white nuns English, and he's talking about black and white and skin and others, and he sings that great gospel spiritual, amen. And the nurses are like, the nuns, they just don't get it. They're singing their high Catholic chants, and he starts doing the black gospel thing. Oh, it's a great movie about faith, and the title Lilies of the Field comes out of this message. Because this wanderer